The content on this channel is for informational and educational purposes only. Please contact your financial advisor for any financial questions you may have concerning your investments. When it's all said and done, there's one inescapable truth about renting versus owning, especially here in Atlanta. You are not building any generational wealth by giving your hard earned money to a landlord every month, every year, for several years. There's just not a good metrics for you. Now, this is particularly true if you're in that 25 to 35-year-old age group. I'm talking to you. Yes, there are benefits, especially in times like this when the cost of owning a home, the initial costs are so high. There are super benefits if you don't plan on staying in that residence forever or staying in a town forever that you might want to be renting. But understand, every year that you rent is a year away from owning your home and building generational wealth. We're going to talk about some of the things that you should be looking at after age 35, especially. Now, this is particularly true for those of us who were able to take advantage of home buying markets right before the last big crash, when prices of homes were very low, mortgages were readily available, and taxes were really, really low, taxes and insurance. I was in that market. At the time, it didn't feel like it was a benefit, far from it. Right after I got into my home, maybe about 18 months, that's when the bottom fell out of the economy. I lost my job. Um, mortgages, mortgage companies were just collapsing left and right. Foreclosures were almost as high as what they are right now. And I was stuck. No money coming in, mounting debt. How did you get out of it? Even throughout all of that, I still understood where I came from, and that was renting and watching rents exceed two times, three times my monthly income at times. So I had to work two jobs just to make ends meet. It got sickening because all I was doing was working, working, working. Did that change initially with the home? Absolutely not. But my monthly started going down. I could actually live. I could actually afford to stay in my home with one job. And that's where I was at. Now, if you are in that 25 to 35-year-old age group, that's where I was at when I bought my house. It was a struggle, but I did it without roommates or any help regarding keeping this house. I qualified for a loan and I kept that loan. The thing that I knew I had to take advantage of was this little thing called equity. Equity is your key to unlocking your generational wealth. You are actually building wealth by paying for your primary residence. Now, those of us who've been renting all our lives, we don't know anything about equity. We don't get taught this stuff in school. No one's ever going to tell you that property values actually increased, even in times like these where property values are skyrocketing, cost of ownership are skyrocketing. But how is that different from where you're renting right now? Wait. The difference is you don't get an annual tax write off for renting that apartment. You don't get to build equity in that apartment. And you say, oh, I don't want to pay for maintenance. That is the worst excuse you could ever make. Even if you have top notch maintenance, how much money do you think it's going to save you by renting an apartment because your AC is broken and you don't have to pay for it versus living in a house? My AC actually had been broken at my worst time for years, not months, years. The cost of getting that device repaired when it finally went far exceeded what I could afford, thousands of dollars. But there are ways to mitigate those costs, and that cost is only going to be one time in 10 years because that's the length of that warranty on that unit. So I could either pay $7,000 one out of 10 years if I happen to have this thing break again, versus paying $3,000 or $4,000 a month in that same period of time for 7, 8 years if you've been in that apartment. What are you actually saving? You multiply that by any other repair that you're going to have to do. There's a roof that's got to get replaced. I've been in this house for 17 years. It's time to go. This is my second roof replacement. It's got to go. It's got to be replaced. You have insurance. If you don't have any claims, cool. But if you use that insurance, your insurance rate may go up. You may just be able to pay for it in cash. You definitely saved more money than renting, so you might want to factor that in. Now, we're going to go through some of the actual rents down here in Atlanta and some of the areas that you might want to live. We're going to look at some of the areas that you don't want to live. But all of these things have one thing in common. You're paying a mortgage in these rental places. You're just not paying your own. And as you're paying them, understand, every year when you file your taxes, you're not getting a dime in discounts or any tax write-offs back. Not one dime as a renter. Let's get into it. Now we're going to zoom in on Atlanta, and I'm going to just give you some of the rundown of the city if you haven't never been here. Now, when I first moved, I lived in a pretty affluent area. It wasn't as affluent as it is now, but this was Sandy Springs. This is just outside the perimeter. One of the apartment complexes there that I lived in at the time, this was, mid 90s. Trust me, it was nowhere near what we're paying now. That's $1,700 for that one bedroom, one bath, 600 square foot apartment. Man, I was paying like $450. Yeah, I'm old. But that's what we're talking about here. $1,700 a month. Now, for some of you guys, that might seem like a great deal, especially if you're coming from New York. This is top notch. You good. Man, in Atlanta, the pay scales are just not the same as they were back east. It's not. You're not making that kind of money down here. Now, if you are able to finagle the bagel and make that kind of scratch and pay this low rent compared to what we are used to paying back home, you Gucci. But again, $1,700 a month does not include your utilities and whatever other fees and dues they have going on at that apartment complex. And that's just one area. Now, we're going to zoom in. Where everybody wants to be right now is in that central corridor. All right, Mechanicsville is a good place. 2 units. Let's look at, oh my goodness. Let's take a look at Mechanicsville. There's 3 units available here. All right. These are spacious apartments. But we are talking big money. 750 square feet for 1 bedroom, 1 bath, $1,500. What's your average income right now? What are you making right now? Can you afford that by yourself? Ask yourself. That's a lot of money. 2 bedroom on Pryor Street. Yo, Pryor Street is right downtown, but it's not for the faint of heart. $2,500 a month. That's a salary to live comfortably. You gotta be making around $40, $45 an hour. If you're not doing that, sit your ass down. Sit down somewhere. This is not for the faint of heart. Nice apartment. But again, you're paying all this money in 10 months. That's $25,000. 10 months. Add another 5,000 for the last 2 months of the year. That's $30,000 a year in rent. 30 grand. Is it that far out of the box? If you start right now and try to own your own apartment, own your own home. If you have a roommate, and I suggest you get one if you don't have your significant other, and y'all work this out. Anybody that's on that, oh, I don't do 50-50, you tripping. You are really tripping. There's no way you can afford to be a kept person while your significant other is out there grinding just so y'all can get in a better place. It's just not. It's just not good. Now, I really hadn't planned on turning this into a red pill conversation, but this is just what it is. This is not the time or day and age for you to be looking for a 1960s man in 2025 prices. That's just not it. In 1960s, you could buy a house for what you're paying in rent right now and be done with it in 5 to 10 years and not 30. It was easier for that man who was working that factory job, bringing home a decent salary, to be able to maintain a household when the houses were only about $25,000. Get it? Cool. Also remember back in that time, women didn't have the ability to have a paycheck. You couldn't have a bank account. You do realize that. 1974 was the first time you were able to get a bank account as a woman without your daddy's signature or your husband's signature. You couldn't have a bank account. Couldn't get any credit lines. There was no such thing. So get that out your head. This only happened in my generation. I was 4 years old. 1974. That's when women got the right to own a bank. Now, the women that I've grown up with, they've always had their own. As we got in high school and graduated, girls I went to school with always had their own bank accounts, and they were doing it just like the guys were. But something along the way got switched. People want to have that financial freedom, but they still want to be treated like kept women. And we don't live in an economy where that's the case. Anybody that has anything contrary to say to that are seriously practicing some financial illiteracy. There is just no getting around these numbers. You do not make, on average, enough money to pay for this by yourself. Now, if you're a part of that 1%, which 90% of us are not, that 10%, that top 10%, the rest of us, average income in this country is around $55,000 for African Americans. So you need to tell me that if you are out there by yourself making $55,000, I know quite a few of you are not, you're going to give $30,000 of that away to a landlord and not get to write it off at the end of the year? Yeah, see, every year that you're out there doing that, you're taking away from your own generational wealth. Now, this is not to say it's an easy thing to get a house. It's not. It's not easy to even come up with that down payment to start saving just to get into the struggle of keeping your home. But the alternative is to continue to give that money to somebody else's mortgage. Because understand, that complex that you're living in, that's not owned. That's property that somebody's making income off of. And soon as it becomes favorable to sell that property, you and all your neighbors are out in the street for a new development. It's just it's just business. What are some of the drawbacks of owning a home? Let's talk about that for a little bit. Pros about renting. Okay. This one I don't know too much about because I'm way older than that. It's called flexibility. You can bounce from apartment to apartment without having any long-term commitments. You're not paying any taxes, property taxes, and you're not paying any insurance unless you have or opt to get renter's insurance. That would make sense to somebody who doesn't plan on being around for a long time, just going with the flow. And that happens when you're at that 22 to 30 something year old, maybe 34. But after 35, you need to really start settling in and locking in on what you're trying to do. Now, a lot of young kids these days are getting it, and they're coming in to this market with some equity because they know that whether they're renting an apartment themselves or they're going in on a home with someone, and then when you both get ready to bounce, you split the equity of that house and the sell the proceeds of that house and keep it pushing. This is probably the best thing you can do because if you got somebody that's solid and you are willing to roommate with somebody in an apartment, why not roommate in the house? It doesn't have to be the greatest house, but this is just something that you're trying to make a quick flip on and then bounce when you're ready to settle down and lock in with that significant other if that's your goal. It just doesn't make any sense to me if you are, if you are definitely not going to be sitting still for a while and you want to travel the world and do whatever you want to do at 20 something years old. Home ownership may not be for you, but that's one good reason why people rent versus own at that age. Positives about owning that home ownership, again, it comes down to that equity and that mortgage. You're getting tax write-offs at the end of the year for every year that you own your home, and this can be thousands of dollars a year, like $1,000, $2,000 right off of the taxes that you owe. That's big money. $2,000 more than you will ever get from an apartment because you're not getting that form at the end of the year, that mortgage interest form to file on your taxes. This is definitely a benefit. Also, what you're getting again is the equity. That is basically, if you have any equity, 20, 30, 80, $100,000 credit card limit basically. And you're paying just on what you borrow on a HELOC versus a home equity loan itself. Home equity line of credit allows you some flexibility in finances. So what you're losing in flexibility and being able to roam around and move around from apartment to apartment, you're gaining in flexibility with your pocket. And that to me is more beneficial than anything you can ever dream of while you're renting. That opens the door for you to get the things that you want or invest in the things that you need, such as a business. It gives you collateral. You don't have collateral in an apartment. You just don't. You're just paying somebody. That's not good. Now you're building a good track record if you continue to pay your rent on time. That'll help you get a loan, but that's the only purpose you would rent is so you can qualify for a major loan like a mortgage. Understand, one thing needs to happen before you get generational wealth, and that's accumulation of property. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, there were some things that kind of overlap now because the economy is so jacked up. You're looking at a previous or a past pro of renting, meaning that there was always going to be a fixed amount of rent you're going to be paying. That's no longer the case. Those rents go up almost monthly, and the low cost of putting down on an apartment versus putting down on a house, that too is out the window. The average application for an apartment down here, these renters or these landlords want you to have 6 times, 4 to 6 times the rent per month. Who can do that? Who can do that? Even if you get one of the more affordable $1,500 um, apartments, what's 4 times $1,500? You making $6,000 a month just to qualify for this apartment? I think not. Now, the average home price in Atlanta right now is hovering around $350,000, $400,000. Okay, now you can find some homes, reconditioned, refurbished, in the 250. Like mine's on the market for around 289. That said, $6,000 is quite a bit of money to put down on a home. All right, it's not going to be the biggest, baddest home, but there are other areas out here. If you want to drive a little further, you may be able to squeak one out. But the thing about it is that you have some flexibility with that. So understand that's a lot of money to put down on an apartment versus putting down on a piece of land or some property. Just my 2 cents on that. Now, I'm not going to shy away from the overall point that I'm trying to make here. It is just better to own. I understand that it is just not really possible or feasible for many people to own a home, but you can start working on it. And that's what I suggest you do. Because when it's all said and done, if you were sitting in that apartment for 7 years, any apartment, you moved around or whatever, you have absolutely no equity to show for it. None. Equity is something that's transferable. I can use the equity that I built in this house, again, in favorable conditions, to buy another house, rent this one out, sell this one, have that cash in a bank account somewhere, real generational wealth, while living totally rent free in my new home that I built brand new with some of the equity that I purchased or earned over the life of this mortgage. This is how you grow that wealth. You cannot do that in an apartment. I cannot stress that enough. Let me know what you thought about this content. I went long because we need to go long on this one. A lot of kids, or when I say kids, I mean people in their 20s and 30s, just don't know these simple truths. I didn't know it until I got into it. So let's make sure we start spreading the word that, hey, if you can roommate with a homeboy or your homegirl or your significant other, you can go in on a house. And just as long as you get your agreements together, maybe we need to devote some time talking about that. Say something happens and you guys fall out for whatever reason, you still have equal shares of that home and treat it like a business. So when one person act up, hey, I'm gonna get paid. I'm leaving, and you going it's what it is. Figure something out. Talk to you later.